majority of the world are illiberal and are deeply conservative. And what are the average teenager's biggest questions? Am I a freak? Is this normal? And here, AI normalizes saying, yeah, this is perfectly normal. So yes, you can speak about it being big tech, extractive, which is, it doesn't mitigate that we need to come up with legitimate choices against Silicon Valley, but we have to recognize the value people are getting.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the MCWCast, the podcast for anyone considering studying, currently enrolled, employed, or looking back at their time in the Media and Culture department. My name is Rosalyn, and I'm your host for today. Today's guest is the Professor of Inclusive AI Cultures here at Utrecht University, co-founder of the Inclusive AI Lab. She's also the author of over 100 journal articles and award-winning books, including The Next Billion Users with Harvard Press, Forbes named her the next billion champion and the right kind of person to reform tech. She has been listed in the 100 Brilliant Women in AI Ethics of 2025 and won the 2025 Women in AI Benelux Award. Her work on diversifying AI has reshaped the AI landscape. Please welcome Dr. Payal Arora.
Thanks so much. Lovely to be here.
Yes. So, for the MCWCast, we like to start by asking a couple intro questions. One of them is, what's your favorite way to consume media?
That's a good question. For me, it's more about going through channels where a lot of my extended family are. So it's not so much the media itself, it's who's on it. So I notice that a lot of my nieces and nephews spread around the world are all on Instagram. So that's one of my favorite ways because it gets me to be part of their lives.
Yeah, really connecting.
Yeah.
And then also, kind of, what's your favorite media product, like film or television show?
I like listening to a Rest of World, for example. It's a very cool long form media outlet which goes deep dive into stories. So basically, it's investigative journalism, but not for crime or anything. It's just everyday life, and it's really deep. So I think I missed that in this very, so shall we say, fast food media culture.
Yeah.
So I have this real appetite for deep dives and other kinds of outlets that actually commit to that, right?
Yeah, so you feel like you are really focused on long-form content.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Also, what drove you to Utrecht's Media and Culture department?
Well, one is that there was this freedom to build something from bottom up. I noticed that Utrecht University's biggest strength is this beautiful chaos at the bottom, where you see enormous number of groups, springing on variety of passion projects. And it allows I think it's much like a mirror of the cityscape itself, right? Our university is spread across the city. And, there's so many little fiefdoms. And within these fiefdoms, so much passion and contestation. And I think that's it is a beautiful mess. And those who like a little messiness, a little discomfort, and like to, find their ways in smaller circles but meaningful circles, I think it's really very fitting.
Yeah, and so I was wondering if, what was your academic and professional background a bit?
Yeah, so I'm kind of an unusual character here because, the backdrop is I'm born and brought up from India and Bangalore, actually. And I left as a teenager for the US. And I was this artist, activist, and I really saw myself as a muralist and I don't know, some famous artist. Anyway, it clearly didn't happen. But I was in San Francisco and I was very much in the art scene. And then, well, let's just say poverty was not very sexy. So I was like, okay, gotta get a real job. And the next best thing was becoming an art dealer because I could talk and I knew about art. And if you can't do the art, you can sell the art kind of logic. And actually, that went on for many, many years. So I was art gallerist and art dealer in San Francisco for many years. And we really were capitalizing on the .com era. And then I moved to New York. And that's when bizarrely, I got in touch with research purely based on post 9/11. I moved there where there was a lot of discussion of should New York keep with the art tax, because shouldn't we pivot everything into PTSD? And actually, there was a pushback saying no, even more so. Post 9/11, people need mental health, and arts can be a really generative way in which people can heal. And so my boss volunteered me for this Harvard research project, saying, okay, go take some time and do your bit. And I was like, wow, people actually get paid for research? That's crazy. And so anyway, so that was how I entered academia. Is the guy who was leading the project at Harvard said, hey, why don't you apply for your master's and work with me? Because I think this could be a very cool, way in which we can do this. And so I'm like, really? Okay. So I just shifted into that. And next thing you know, I got a PhD at Columbia and I became an academic, but really much later in life, I have to say. So it wasn't that, oh my God, I have a vision for becoming a professor. Absolutely nothing on those. Like, it was so not on the radar.
Yeah, and as your time now as an academic, do you ever look back and kind of miss the art curation and then dealing world?
Let's just say I was so much more interesting at cocktail parties than academia. I'm like, let me tell you about my latest publication. Snore. Whereas I'm like, oh, let me tell you about my new gallery opening and this crazy artist. And oh, we went to Martha's Vineyard and we had a little thing. That's always cool. People love listening to those stories. I was like, I don't have that kind of I miss having that stuff.
Yeah, and how did you get your start in AI specifically?
Well, it's more about, so I remember throughout Harvard, I was told, hey, you are a Harvard person. They're going to roll the red carpet. You are better than everybody else. Da, da, da. And I'm like, oh, wow, these guys are going to come chasing after me and nothing. You know why? Because we were in this real dip in the economy. So I was like, I had applied for 50 jobs or something, nothing. And I was like, what happened to all this? I'm a Harvard University candidate. Where is it? And so what happened is I started to look out of the box. I'm like, okay, everyone's applying to these places. So let me do something different. And I reached out to people who are doing cool work around the world because I'm young. And this is something I would love to emphasize for anyone listening is, when you have more freedom, you can travel the world. Do you prefer to get your start by printing paperwork and being in an office, but you have the brand, you have Google or Microsoft, or you have a World Bank, but you're actually not doing real stuff? Or do you want to join something small but very interesting and be the leader and really grow in that position? And then you should choose something which is less known but allows you a bigger capacity. It could be within the Netherlands, across Europe, or even elsewhere. So for me, it was, I noticed this guy who was doing cool work. He was a CEO of something called Planet Read, and they had won this what social entrepreneurship award by Harvard and all. I'm like, oh, cool, and some World Bank Marketplace Awards. I'm like, okay, I want to see. And what they were doing was bringing technologies to rural areas in India. And I'm from India, and I'd never been to a village. I'm such a city girl. I'm like, maybe I need this challenge. I have no idea what that is. And 70% of the population then lived in rural areas. So I'm like, let me know the real India. So they're like, okay, we can pay you to go for 1 year, but you have to stay in a village, but you will be part of this Hewlett Packard initiative in partnership with World Bank. So all these big brands, okay? The idea is that we want to launch our products in the entire south of India, a particular state. And so one of the launching pads is where we're going to do this immersion of these technologies for this rural area where they can leapfrog into socioeconomic mobility and become amazing. Anyway, so I was like, and that you can be the liaison between these different teams. I'm like, sounds great. It's a job. It looks good on my resume, but actually, it also seems like I'm going to learn a lot. And I did. Honestly, it was one of the best experiences of my life. I mean, completely humbling, because when you're at the ground, you are the expert. The guy who is the head of World Bank sitting in DC, or Microsoft sitting in Seattle, they don't know as much as you know, because you're experiencing it on a ground level. So I remember my peers at Harvard who got their think tank jobs, in DC and all. They were like, "You crazy. You should have like taken one of those jobs." And I was like, "No, let me do this." And I literally, it turned around where I was invited by these organizations to represent what happened to the project, what is going on, and I became the key spokesperson. So, I really hope those listening feel, because in the end of the day, it's such a precious time. Our time is so precious, and the freedom of mobility. If you can travel, take risks now, because it just gets harder, and I miss that.
Yeah, and then here, one of the classes I took with you was AI in Society. And what I thought was really interesting in that class was that all around we have this big discourse about the negative impacts of AI, the warnings of what could come, and kind of the big bad of it all. But a big focus of your course was using AI for good. And you platformed a lot of these startups and companies that are funding with AI to help those that are, in need of kind of using it for good. I wonder how you kind of came to that in this world of things. I mean, the course literature was your book From Pessimism to Promise, and I thought that was really beautiful way to kind of summarize the view that you have, and I wonder how you kind of built that view.
Yeah, so, it's in the last few years, I've been working with a number of think tanks. So I sit on the e-governance board for the UN, and for the digital economy in India, and a committee for the Internet Bill of Rights in Brazil. And across board, one of the things I kept hearing again and again is, who are we to subject the unconnected to being connected? Because aren't we just feeding them into this extraction regime? Is this morally right? And that really concerned me, because these are people with deep privilege. They have 24/7 connectivity, and they somehow have these double standards that somehow we have added resilience because why? Like, we live in these contexts, but the rest of the world need to be protected. Very paternalistic, right? Like, if we can do it, why can't they, right? So that was one thing which was really disturbing me, because that was quite new in the last few years. 2 decades ago, it wasn't the case. Everyone was like, yay, the internet's gonna, like, just look at the metaphors. Global village and homepage, and there was much more positive connotations of what technology can bring us. And look, every technology is going to have the full spectrum of the good and bad, because it's a manifestation of our human capacities, and we have the capability of being extremely evil to extremely amazing. And so why are we surprised that technologies are not reflecting that elastic extent of sort of capacity? So that was really the driver. But most importantly, it was my 2 decades of being an ethnographer and going into these fields. And every time I moved from, whether it's the Netherlands or speaking to American students, were getting darker and darker. And we now have the statistics to prove it, is that young people getting more and more down and out about technologies in the West, and it's the opposite in the rest of the world. And the reason being is, 90% of young people live in the global South. Majority of them don't have a vision given by the state or by their parents or by their societies about who they can be. So a farmer's kid is supposed to be a farmer, a plumber's kid is going to be a plumber, and they're like, screw this. I'm going to be somebody else. I'm not going to be what, every generation has, just because I was born in the wrong place with less privilege. So you see the rising of the creator economy coming from these people are getting online, and compared to what's they're experiencing in their everyday realities, they do see a real change in their lives, right? They see people from around the world recognizing them, legitimizing them with the likes and as followers, and you really see that value giving confidence and playing out in their everyday lives. or you can think in terms of conservative cultures. Majority of the world are illiberal and are deeply conservative. 65 countries criminalize being homosexual, many to the point of death. And what are the average teenager's biggest questions? Am I a freak? Is this normal? Sex and sexuality is pathologized as if it's something, abnormal. And here, AI, tools, whether it's ChatGPT or, Minstrel or any of these tools, normalize saying, yeah, this is perfectly normal. So yes, you can speak about it being big tech, extractive, it doesn't mitigate that we need to come up with legitimate choices against Silicon Valley, but we have to recognize the value people are getting, particularly young people, in these various contexts. And if you're not giving fair weight to that, we won't quite get why do people take extraordinary risks, despite the obvious harms, and then we would have a very paternalistic explanation saying, you know what, it's because they're ignorant, they don't have the literacy. No, if you're an Afghanistani woman or girl who cannot go to university or school or even meet your friends outside, you are covered in a chadar, then in comparison, of course, the digital is one of your lifelines because it humanizes you. You can, take it out and you can express yourself. You can sing, you can dance at home because that's also illegal, by the way. So, let's get out of our little bubble. And like I say, pessimism is a privilege for those who can afford to despair. Majority of the world can't, and they move forward they look at optimism as a commitment to change. And that's really important to underline that.
Yeah, and I think that was such an important part of your class for me because I do live in that Western bubble. I had that pessimism privilege of not viewing it in a way that could be positive ever. And so to have someone first speak about how this could be positive, how this could be used for good, and then, like you talked about the statistics of a majority of the world can view this and have this as something that's very, very positive to their lives, that can impact them in ways that is not offered in another setting at all. I also really loved the metaphor in your book of poachers. So you kind of set up a situation where you would say if drones could be used to kind of deter poachers or even hurt them in some way, is that okay? And a lot of our class were like, yes, that's great. We're, cutting down on poaching. We view poaching as a negative thing. But then you change the connotation to, what if those drones were policing people in our streets here now? How would we view that differently, even though it's a similar thing? It's a very interesting, the kind of different viewpoints that you presented throughout our class, I thought was really beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's part of the idea that we tend to humanize certain populations and dehumanize just because they're so beyond our imagination. And it's okay because everyone has their limits of what they can imagine because it's so different and there's something which is very natural about it. That being said, is that we need to have the humility to understand that we don't know what we don't know, right? So is really essential starting point. Whereas it being a techno solutionism where you're like, well, poachers are bad. Yes, of course, we don't want, endangered species to die. But if you really want to address why do we have this as a profession in the first place? And is it really about information deficit and not knowing where the poachers are? Actually, a lot of time it was common knowledge who these poachers were. They were often relatives of even the ones who were the rangers. It's just that there were not many jobs. All these safaris, which, by the way, can be really expensive, right? Like your tickets can be 10,000 to all the way to 40, 50,000. And who gets to enjoy that money? It's a tiny group of people. So there's this resentment that this is really not actually for everybody. And so it's a part of this tension is socioeconomics, lack of opportunities. And I'm not justifying poaching. I'm just saying that if we need to fix a problem, you can't just put technology because it will continue, right? You need to also think the rangers why would they put their life in line when they weren't even paid for 3 months at a time? They didn't have proper shoes. They weren't even like, some of them actually didn't even get their salary for months at a time. So, so we need to understand why people do what they do. And it's not because they lack the best technology necessarily. I mean, think about how much money we would save, but also how many animals you would save just by getting this right.
Yeah, and I think addressing that bias is something that was really important throughout what we learned and what you were teaching us, and at the forefront of a lot of what you do. Because, I mean, we talked about how not only do the Western audience or the global North have a view of what the global South is, and that differing opinions on what AI can do for you, but also the kind of idea that AI itself is intrinsically biased, and that as we were tasked with creating AI prompts and images, we had to see this bias. With a lot of them, projects in the class were generate a single mother, and
Yes.
what racial predisposition bias, where are you coming from nationality wise, what did the AI come up with when you prompted it with single mother? I thought that was very interesting as well.
Yeah, I was also very impressed by the kinds of projects you all, I remember that day where all of you put the images
Hmm.
on the wall, and it was so crazy, right? Like what's a Dutch family? Or yeah, like for example, like all these like banal phrases, even family, just family,
Yeah.
right? There was a sort of vision for what a family looks like. And the fact is, we romanticize that obviously all these kids have good families, and then I think that's actually very insightful, is that why have AI become one of the most important coping mechanism for teenagers, is because a lot of teens don't feel like they can even talk to other teens. They don't, or they're isolated at school, they're getting bullied, or they don't have families who actually allow them to be who they are. So a lot, much of that teenhood is about self-actualization. So if you see all this anxiety about, let's ban mobiles in Australia, let's ban these tools here or there because of all the harms, and of course there are harms. I mean, there's no like deep fake porn, everything, it's not mitigating it. But to understand, why do teenagers still choose that, understanding it's not because they're stupid, it's because, well, compared to others, it's so unbearable for them to be lonely or to not be understood, that they will like chat with these. And DeepSeek, the number one, use by young people, is for a sort of a coping and companionship of just everyday life. Like they want to download their day in an honest way without judgment. And that, how do we put a price to that without judgment? I think that's really important. And I think if you honestly are thinking about it, we all are so afraid of being judged. And we tend to have a performative persona, right, with our friends and even our families. So, I think there is something about, yes, of course, it's your most intimate data is going to big tech, where we then need to target and make sure that not just we regulate, but also we enforce it if that kind of leakage happens. And also, maybe we should also encourage more public platforms where they could be much more citizen centered. So these are all generative positive discussions, but it doesn't take away from the fact that, well, honestly, we don't have those competitive, engaging tools which are, responsible and ethical right now in that sense. But teenagers will use anything at their disposal because they can't wait for us to get our act together for a couple of years. They'll be out of their teens. They
Yeah.
need it now. So they will choose that. And we've got to stop making them feel like stupid, or that they need more literacy, or that we should just protect them from themselves and just ban it. So I think that's really why I've been really pushing that, uh, let's look at the reasons why people do what they do before we start coming up with these grand, suggestions.
Yeah, I think it really speaks to that, and that the kind of therapy, unloading your day when therapy is not an option for the majority of teens especially
Yeah.
out there, whether it's family pressures or financial struggles. I think that it's really good to say that you don't want to lose the critical lens, but you
Yeah.
still need to think about what are the underlying issues that are here.
Yeah, I actually some I had a number of conversations with students at Utrecht who came to me in private. Uh, actually, one was Ukrainian and another was Russian, and that was very interesting because they were very two different
Hmm.
worlds. And this Russian student told me, she said, I had this really negative outlook towards all digital because I've been constantly, we grow up with this constant surveillance, and I look at it as tied to the state. And when you gave me all these other examples, for me, it was just impossible to think of tech as being at all good. So she was actually happy to just understand that not everything's Russia, right, in that context. And then for the Ukrainian student, she's like, well, she really loves ChatGPT like crazy because she misses all her families there, and for her, it's her. And also, she's not comfortable with the language right now, and so for her, she's just trying to get through life, and she uses it for everything. And she said that her friends at kind of shamed her, saying that, oh, so you don't care about the climate, and so you're so naive, right, to say something. You can't say I love it. So she said she kind of started to self-censor, and she stopped talking about it, but she, even though she uses it, and she almost started to feel guilty about it. And so, these are the kinds of stories I hear and I engage with. And I was like, this is why we need to be open about it. We need to speak up because they can't, because we become too moralistic, and condemn them. People are using it for different purposes. And we shouldn't shame them into this kind of usage. Doesn't mean that these tools like big tech we should celebrate.
Yeah.
It doesn't equate it or translate
Hmm.
that, right?
And do you have like kind of a vision for the future? And so to speak, is that moving on from the ethical kind of conversation? Because I mean, I think we always have to address that.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's always there, but at the same time, not self-censoring or getting to a point where it is open. You feel like that's kind of where we should be heading.
Yeah, so I tend to spend a lot of my time with technologists. In fact, this morning I was also at Zorg and ICT, an event for healthcare and ICT. And healthcare has become much broader. It's become about everyday care. It's not just about, oh, I have an emergency, I'm in a hospital, what app do I use? Or I have diabetes, what app? It's much more. It's about mental health, about everyday lifestyle, about diet. It's about, just well-being. And that's actually a major progress, right? But what I'm emphasizing is that we need to build tools that really are not driven based on, ooh, what are the latest technologies and let's implement it across board, but what are the deep needs of people and how do we then build from there? So it has to be need driven and not technology driven. And that's really important to understand that culture is capital. It's not a barrier to, scalability. It is actually scalable if you think in terms of that much of this culture can give you a USP. So if you're understanding generations, it's not just about national identity or gender identity. It could also be about generations, how the way in which young people speak versus the elderly who are also increasingly lonely.
You're also headlining the Data Care Festival this year, coming up soon in June 9th to the 12th.
Yes.
So what is the Data Care Festival?
Yeah, so basically, we have this inclusive AI lab that I founded about 2 years ago. So we're young, but we have, um, it's also very driven by like PhDs, postdocs, some assistant professors, but substantively young PhDs who are from all over the world, from China to Chile, Africa. It's really one of the few. We are women led, global south led. And it's really refreshing because we have this unique positionality of having the privilege of being in the north and also being able to be bridge builders between the north and the south, as well as the south and the south. And for us to also understand how we can do this. And so what we've done is not just in those terms, but also we believe to fundamentally build inclusive AI tools and policies and technologies, you need to bring people out of their comfort zone. So we have a fellows program, which is 1/3 people who are in the civic sector, 1/3 who are business, and 1/3 who are academics, and they all tend to wear these multiple hats, and majority come from around the world. So we bring them together in this festival where we do workshops to understand how can we move this forward under sustainable AI, creative AI. We literally have field trips going to 3D Universum, a company in Amsterdam, IKEA for sustainable AI, to understand how can a massive company like IKEA think about sustainable AI from a global lens, and maybe even, God forbid, revisit their sacred IKEA motto, right? Because it's not about a disposable culture anymore. It's not sustainable, right? So how do you rethink something which has been so successful? So we have them, we have Adobe coming, we have museums like Victoria and Albert Museum. So like it's a really interesting. So we have these 5 strands, and we're going to these locations, and we're going to come and share. So it's really a feast of like just getting out of our comfort zone. Everybody is an imposter. Embrace the imposter syndrome. And because we always are not fitting into something, especially when you do it across disciplines and across sectors. And the idea is that in the end, this is really a reflection of what our society is. If you want to naturalize and massage it and normalize it, you will have to deal with these different people and mindsets. And how do you move forward from there? So we literally have, on 9th, a data archive about how to archive speak to power, like basically data sets being the garbage in, garbage out. But what if we were to turn it around and make them quality data sets which represent the world? On the 10th, we have these workshops across these, and then on the 11th, as I mentioned, field trips to all these different organizations, and the 12th is a PhD-led day on how can any scholars, including, by the way, it's open to master students who want to be able to communicate and engage with non-academics. How do you speak in normal human ways and understand that what you're doing matters? So how to translate that into it. So you're going to get feedback from the CTO of Save the Children, or, so we have an influencer, Iranian influencer. And so it's just like a fun way of bringing, and we're going to do this again next year. So, and this is very much embedded and part of Utrecht, driven mainly by Utrecht University students, a lot from the media and culture studies.
This year's theme is techno-optimism, and taking from the hype-based AI is amazing, and the doom-filled kind of sadness part of it, finding a way in the middle. What kind of drove you to do the techno-optimism as the theme this year?
So obviously it's a bit of a trolling, isn't it? It's like, because the moment you say techno-optimism, it's like this gut level reaction, like, so these tech bros are like, man, this is going to save the world, and that's the image that comes to your mind. And so I'm like, why should they claim optimism? I mean, and this is partly why we are increasingly getting pessimistic, because we have this justifiable reaction against techno optimism, is that I'm going to save the day with a hashtag, and then you're like, oh, don't worry, it created problems, I'm going to fix it with another hashtag. It's like, so techno solutionism. And so for my reclaiming techno optimism is from the grounded ways, how it's a commitment to change, as I mentioned, and that we need to build tools based on need-based, based on aspiration-based, from people and communities that have long been excluded, which, by the way, is the majority of us. It's like much of the data sets reflect a tiny sliver, like healthcare data. It's really on middle-class, male, white, in oftentimes in even California. And we build entire products and services and then universalize it. So, of course, there's something to be said about it. So it starts with the mindset that we need to reclaim it, make it ours, because pessimism doesn't drive you to change. It is optimism, whether it's through protest, any kind of activist act is a form of optimism. Otherwise, you wouldn't be moving forward, right? So.
Yeah. And then do you feel focusing on these lived realities will be able to overcome that kind of fear mongering that's out there now?
I mean, in these deeply polarizing times, I've been thinking about how do I carve a space? Do I channel my energies towards contesting doomsday divas, as I call them? Or do I build an alternative space where people can feel at home, where we are not our country, we are not our organization? So, really, a sort of a space which, every year we get fellows and we anoint these fellows from around the world. And I deliberately select people from very different regions, possibly contesting. So next year's fellows is going to be from Israel and from the Middle East, in different parts of the Middle East. And the reality is, we do not represent our countries, our organizations, even nationality. Why should I represent all of women? Or gender. It's like I'm not a prototype Indian. So why should we not bring? And I think because there's too much polarizing, and so that's what I've decided is let me commit to building this space, generate a space where we can actually start to listen to each other, engage with each other, and build something together. And in the building, other good things happen. You start to feel like being part of it, and you start to humanize each other. And so, yeah, it's my little quiet form of activism because I really detest labels. And I think many people actually silently do because the Ukrainian student is not a representative of all of Ukraine. She's not representative of all of females. And, so we know that, right, for a fact. So we just, can't help ourselves, to, because we cope with labels. So let's delabel.
Delabel. Well, here at the MCWCast, we also like to do a little segment called This or That, where I will ask you two things, and you have to pick which one you prefer. Are you ready?
Fun. Okay.
The city center or the science park?
City center.
Film or television?
Film.
Literary research or interviews?
Interviews.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Hey, that's a good one. Oh, it depends. Is it a noble war?
In front of the camera or behind the scenes?
Behind the scenes.
Disney or Pixar?
Pixar.
Action or a rom-com?
In all honesty, rom-coms. It's like my brain candy.
Yeah. Pre or post-production?
Ooh, post-production.
Netflix or YouTube?
YouTube.
Old Hollywood or the streaming age?
Streaming age.
Cinema at home or cinema at the theater?
Cinema at home.
Play or a musical?
Play.
You win!
Oh, this is fun, actually.
Yeah.
I like that.
We also like to do a closing question. And for our closing question, it is, as you've spent your time here at Utrecht University, what is one thing that you would like to let a prospective professor, a student, or someone that's just kind of wanting to join our department at some point, what would you want them to know?
That one of the best things about being at Utrecht University is the extraordinary amount of things you could be doing, groups you could be joining, talks you could be attending. I mean, honestly, I was overwhelmed myself. I moved 2 years ago to Utrecht University, and I was surprised. Every week, the calendar was like, I was like, which one do you pick? And so I think in one way, you're a kid in a candy store. So I suggest that that's the strength. But on the other hand, it could also become a bit chaotic because there's just too much. So I think it helps you to get to know yourself, because when you select what you want to select, you learn something about yourself. So pay attention to your choices, just like you put me through those choices, right? And through those choices, it's a great way of self-actualization through our program. And I think it'll be a very fulfilling journey that way.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank
It's been a
you.
pleasure to interview you and also to have you in class as well.
Thank you so much. And I find this a very commendable and, yeah, really fruitful, pursuit. So thanks.
Please join us for the next episode, and don't forget to check out the Data Care Festival June 9th through the 12th in Amsterdam and Utrecht.